This is Expedition Texas, the podcast, presented by Crazy Water. Hello, folks, and welcome to Expedition Texas, the podcast. I'm your host, Bob Malden, also the host of Expedition Texas on TV, which is in our current season right now. Lots of great adventures all across the state of Texas. We're taking you on your favorite station in your local market. But this is a chance for us to dig in and talk about some of the things that are being featured on the TV show a little bit more in depth. And that's what we're doing today. And I would like to introduce my guest today, who is here, came all the way over from Kilgore, Texas. She is Olivia Moore, and she's in charge of things at the East Texas Oil Museum. Here to tell us all about that is Olivia. Hi, Olivia. Welcome.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Well, we are presented, of course, by our friends over at Crazy Water. Olivia, have you ever been to Mineral Wells, Texas?
I am embarrassed to say I have not.
You have to plan a trip. You have to go by the famous water company and pick up some Crazy Water. I've got my number 4 here, which I'm already almost halfway finished with here. I'm getting all my minerals here today with number 4. You have picked out number 2 here, which this is going to be about like your average everyday spring water. So this has got a lower mineral content. So I think you're going to enjoy that there. We had it nice and chilled for you before you got here. And now we get to chill and talk about the oil field in East Texas, which is a huge part of the history of East Texas and things that have happened ever since oil was discovered in East Texas can all kind of trace back to that one moment in time when things sort of started here. And we actually have an episode with you that's coming up that's going to air this season where we explore it's 2 episodes. Over the course of 2 episodes, the East Texas oil field and pretty much everything related. I mean, we even talk about the gas explosion in New London. We talk about Gaston, Texas, and it all starts sort of at that hub, which is the East Texas Oil Museum where you work. But let's go back in time a little bit, which is what people can do literally when they walk into the oil museum where you work. You guys are like a big life-size living diorama of history in the East Texas oil field. Take us back to the beginning, though. How did that all start, and what was the impact on East Texas?
Well, it's hard to say exactly the pivotal point. Well, the pivotal point was obviously when the well came in, but they had been searching for oil in East Texas all the way back to the early 1900s. Of course, we had Corsicana that had 2 oil booms before. There was Van that came in right before. So they knew oil was in this area, but in the 1920s, the major oil companies had come to East Texas. They drilled 17 wells, all without success, and they said, you know what, there's no oil in this area. We're heading out. Well, there was this guy, Dad Joyner from Oklahoma, that came down. He got some lease land, and then he started drilling. And first he came down, got the leases, started, stopped, left, went back to Oklahoma, came back, then he went again. So 1926, he drilled the first one without success. They got the drill, or they got down to 1,100 feet, got the drill bit stuck. And they said, all right, we got to go out. We got to find more capital. We got to come back a second time. So that second time they started, and they got down to about 2,500 feet and ran out of money. So as even today, you can't really do a lot of things without money. So he went out and he sold off some of those lease lands, because by that time he had about 10,000 acres of leased property with the landowners. And of course, the lease is an agreement between the landowner and the producer to allow the producer to come onto the land and drill for oil. So there has to be an agreement there. You can't just wander onto somebody's land and start drilling.
Does that agreement, and this will come into play later in this, but to set the stage, though, for those of us not familiar with it, does that agreement include any money should oil? Okay.
Yes, it does.
That was a nod yes for those of you listening. That was a very confident yes. So I like that.
It does. And depending on what that contract says, just like with any contract, there's different variables to it. Most of the contracts during the 1920s and into the 1930s had about 12.5% royalty for anything that was produced out of the land. So that comes in play to a lot of the farmers who, skipping ahead a little bit here in the book, but there were a lot of farmers and large landowners that did become very wealthy because of those leases that allowed them to earn royalties off of the production of oil from their land.
All right, fair enough.
But so that was the second time. So he went out and he got some more money and he sold shares to a lot of different folks. And they came back and they drilled the number 3. Now, the number 3 started in May of 1929, and it didn't actually come in until October 3rd, 1930. So it wasn't a fast process, but they got down to 3,600 feet. The oil came in. Everybody was super excited. It was the first well in the East Texas oil field.
So I imagine that, and you're talking about a pretty long period of time here, that it took over a year, I guess, to get. Did it take that long to get down that far? I mean, talk about like the equipment. Then I'm sure we're not hooking up to sophisticated equipment and doing this. I'm sure it was pretty rudimentary at that point.
It was, and the other issue is that he was using a lot of secondhand equipment. So it was already equipment that the majors had determined it was at the end of its life cycle. So it would often break down, and they would run into money troubles again, and they wouldn't be able to hire the workers. And some of the workers had some experience. He got a driller named Ed Laster, who had some success in Louisiana, and he was in Houston, and he came up, so he knew kind of what he was doing. He had successfully brought in wells before, but of course you have to pay everybody.
Yeah.
And so if you can't make payroll, just as today, nobody likes to work for free.
So this wasn't old enough that it was like a mule walking in circles making the bit drill. It was there was actually equipment. It was just toward the end of its useful life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So but they were using those mules to move the derricks from location to location, because that first well they had scouted and they drilled there, and of course they got the drill bit stuck. And then the second one they scooched it a little further, but the mule teams would be hooked up, and the well platform would be on skids. Okay. So the mule team would scooch that right along. Scooch is the
that's technical. That's technical.
Yeah, that's right out of the manual. So they would scooch that along and get to the next site and then drill there. And that's actually how they ended up at the third location. Is they had a third spot scouted, and they were scooching it right along, and one of those skids broke. And as folklore goes, and I haven't found it documented, but as the tale has been told to me, is that Dad Joyner said, "Look, crew, I have enough money to either fix this skid and get to that third location, or I can pay you." And the men said, "Pay us." So they drilled right there, and that happened to be where the oil was, because if they would have gone to that third location, they were close enough to the edge of the field, they would have missed it. If they went to that original location.
So thanks to the breaking down of the skid, we now have, and it's called the Daisy Bradford number 3. Why that?
Well, it's called the Daisy Bradford number 3 because she is the lady that owned the land where the wells were drilled. Initially, they did call it the Joyner number 3, or they called, it kind of went through a couple of iterations of naming. History has decided that it is the Daisy Bradford number 3. She was the lady that owned the farm, and she played a pretty pivotal role in allowing them to continue to be on her land for all of those years. She provided housing for a lot of the workers, gave up her barn, allowed them to come in, really kept hope alive when a lot of people would have given up years before. She kept wanting to allow Joyner to be there and to continue to drill, because he was confident. He had a geologist buddy, Doc Lloyd, and he was confident that it was there. Again, as folklore goes, he said, "I can tell by the lay of the land the oil's here." He was a self-taught geologist. He had no formal training, but history says he was right.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Since it was her land, did she also get some royalties and become a rich lady off of this?
Well...
Uh-oh.
That's not a good well. No, She would have. Unfortunately, she passed away about 2 years later from an appendicitis at the age of 63.
Oh, no. Okay. So at this point, we strike oil here. And I've seen images of this. And when it came in. And we had a gusher.
We did.
Right? And so what happened to the area around that well immediately? I mean, we're talking days after that happened.
Well, of course, everybody came from all over. They knew on September 5th the well was going to come in. That's when they got oil sand. They knew the well was going to come in. They were waiting till the right time to break through and for that gusher. So when you see some of the historic photos, you'll see all of these cars lined up, and it says, the day that it came in. And I always wondered, how did everybody know? Like, if it's a working thing and like these aren't timed out, and like how is everybody there? It was because it was planned.
Okay, so I guess I thought that it was because I've watched the intro to the Beverly Hillbillies too many times and thought, well, you just hit it and it explodes up in the air and oh wow, we found it. But they knew they were on the edge of getting it because of they had oil sand.
Yes. So
that's how they knew.
They knew the oil was going to be there. They knew it was going to come in, and they knew when they were getting really close because, of course.
So then let's invite the media. Let's invite the people. Let's have a thing.
Yes.
And they had a big shindig, and they struck oil, and everybody got covered in oil.
Yes. We'll go with yes.
That sounds really fun. Sounds like a thing I'd like to attend someday, but they just don't do it that way anymore, I guess. But so anyway, yeah. And then like, so they came in, everybody's there, but the population of the cities around East Texas exploded because of this.
Yes. So after the Daisy Bradford number 3 came in, there was about 6 weeks where the lease prices soared. Mm-hmm. So there is also a price that is put forth per acre when you sign the lease. So those prices dramatically increased. Everybody wanted the land. If it wasn't already leased, they were paying high prices to lease the land. In about 6 weeks, nothing happened. Nothing at all happened. And so those lease prices started coming down. And there was a fella that he's pretty pivotal as well. His name is H.L. Hunt. And Hunt saw that the lease prices were coming down, and he wanted to be part of the East Texas Oilfield. So he made a deal with Dad Joyner, and they signed that deal on November 26, 1930. And that essentially gave all of Joyner's leases to H.L. Hunt, his shares in the Daisy Bradford, and Dad Joyner would receive a lump sum, and then he would also receive royalties off of any of those leases that ended up producing.
So did he check out of the business at that point and just go home and collect his cash, or what?
Well, he actually went off to try to find the next big oil well. Or oil field, rather, and for the rest of his life, that's what he did. He never did find another field as
a little
great.
Better funded, though, I guess, after that point.
Yes. He had the capital to get the new stuff.
Yeah, so one of the things that's covered at the East Texas Oil Museum, we're going to talk about the museum itself here before we get done today. And I do want to let folks know, if you listened to our first episode last week, you know that East Texas Oil Museum is a sponsor of Expedition Texas, the podcast. And so we will be telling you about them as we have last week as a part of that. But we want to give folks more in depth with this, because the story of the East Texas Oilfield, you can go there and you can see artifacts and you can see this life-size diorama and experience that at this museum. So we are going to get into that in just a little bit. And what I find fascinating about the life-size diorama aspect of the museum is that the cities around East Texas and that influx of population, I won't say that it was detrimental, but if you look at like the diorama, you have roads that were muddied up by large equipment and vehicles and things, traffic that they were not made to handle. And what was East Texas like, just from the historical data and knowledge and accounts that you have? What was East Texas like after that happened? It had to be like a zoo.
I mean, without the animals, but yes, it definitely was a wild time. I mean, when you think about the city of Kilgore went from 500 people, and it wasn't even a city. It was just kind of an incorporated community.
Like an area.
Yes. Yeah. They actually put together their articles of incorporation in February of 1931 and elected their first mayor then, even though they had been a community, for decades at that point, 50, 60 years. And so it went from 500 to 12,000 people within a few years. By 1936, it was 12,000 people. Today, it's about 15,000 people.
Wow.
So, I mean, when you think about, I always tell the school kids, because we do get a lot of them through, that think about the size of your school. Now multiply that to get this many more people in that same school. And, their eyes get real big because could you imagine sharing your same space with 4 other people or 5 other people? And it was like that across East Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were so many places that had so many, of course, it's Great Depression as well. So by 1935, 34, 32. 1930 something. The date escapes me, but 1 out of every 4 men was unemployed. Well, in those days, we didn't have the social infrastructure we do today. If you weren't working, you weren't making money, you weren't feeding your family, so you were going to go wherever you felt like you could find a job. And like I said earlier, some folks got really rich, but some folks were rich enough to feed their family. Yeah. And that was extremely important in the Great Depression. So as much as other parts of the United States were really feeling the effects of the Depression, here in East Texas, we had that too, but it wasn't quite as severe or as widespread as it was in other places. So the East Texas oil field, for that reason alone, was, and it happened at the right time for a lot of reasons.
You mentioned earlier, and in various different episodes of Expedition Texas down through the years, we've talked about, the Corsicana. In Corsicana, they were drilling for water and accidentally struck oil. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned Van, and Van for a long time has been a sponsor of the TV show Expedition Texas, and Van was a big oil boom there as well, which is what really caused the population there to explode and that to become a very wealthy area in East Texas for a while. What do you know about those other oil fields in and around East Texas?
I know just enough to kind of scratch the surface. I believe Van came in 1929, 28, and it was a major oil company. And when they came together, one of the things that the East Texas oil field, because it was more independent, Van came together and kind of checked themselves on production. So they didn't flood the market, and where in East Texas it was individual and smaller independents, and it was very much produce as much as possible as quickly as possible, because other fields had produced so much that they kind of collapsed the geological formations and couldn't continue to produce oil the way that they thought that they would be able to. So it was get as much as you can as quickly as you can. Van was very smart in how they came together and started producing. And Van's still going today.
Yeah.
That oil field. And then the East Texas oil field, everybody thought there was only going to be so much to be produced. And surprise, here we are 94 years later, still producing.
Yeah.
It's nowhere the production that it once was, but it's still going. There's about 4,000 wells that are still active and producing. At the height of the boom, there was about between 27 and 32,000. The real number hasn't quite gotten in there, but it's a big number.
Well, I actually have a little bit of inside knowledge, just enough to be dangerous here, about how all of this took place. A while back, our company produced I don't know, you may still be using it, the introduction video when folks come into the East Texas Oil Museum, and there are things about that totally fascinated me about the geology that's involved, the saltwater issue that I didn't know was a part of this, and we're going to get into some of the technical aspects of what's really going on under the ground in just a little bit. We're not going to get too scientific or boring about it, but it's pretty cool to think about what these guys were able to do and what they knew at a time when we didn't have all the technology that we have now, and what they were able to do with what they had, and some of the things they learned about that salt water and the things like that were coming from the East Texas oil field, and some things that were developed that are still in use today from that. We're going to get into all of that here in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, Crazy Water. They are the title sponsor of Expedition Texas, the podcast. The waters of Mineral Wells, Texas, have been making folks feel good inside and out since 1881. And maybe that's because of the flavor. Maybe it's because there just might have been a crazy lady who drank from the well. The great story of the Crazy Crazy Water Lady in Mineral Wells. You'll have to check that out sometime. But yeah, either way, you'd be crazy not to drink it. Crazy Water number 4 is my jam. And of course, you can get from the different wells, different mineral content around Mineral Wells. But be sure to go to your local Brookshire store, HEB, Kroger, and so many others and pick up Crazy Water. And make sure to plan a trip out to Mineral Wells and pick up a case of Crazy Water, or just fill your own water bottle straight from the wells there in Mineral Wells at the Famous Water Company. And while you're there, be sure to plan enough time to stop by the Crazy Water Bathhouse and experience the mineral waters of Mineral Wells in the way that folks used to travel from all over the world to do in Mineral Wells. It's Crazy Water, and they are a sponsor here on Expedition Texas, the podcast. And of course, we are also sponsored by the East Texas Oil Museum, and we are talking to Olivia Moore here, and since she's here in person, we're going to let Olivia tell you all about the East Texas Oil Museum and why you need to plan a trip over there to learn all about the oil field in East Texas. Olivia, the East Texas Oil Museum is a treasure in East Texas, and I think people need to realize what we have just down the road in Kilgore, Texas. Tell us all about it.
Well, the East Texas Oil Museum is a spot where you can learn about local history, you can learn about our sciences and geologies, but you can really learn about the people that lived in the 1930s, the men and women who toiled in the soil and brought the East Texas oil field in and changed the lives of everybody in this region from then forward. The first well came in 1930, and we are still experiencing what the effects of that well have been for East Texas. The East Texas Oil Museum has Boomtown, USA, which is a time warp back into 1930s. You can see the muddy streets. You can walk into the general store. You can hear a lively tune in the drugstore. It is one of those things that you need to see in person to truly appreciate what those men and women lived through and what their lives created for us today.
I like to call it a life-size diorama when you say Boomtown, USA, because it is really like you're walking into, almost a movie set, because it's, you have the functioning general store, you have animatronics and things like that. It's really a treasure in East Texas. If you haven't seen it, you need to make sure that you make time to go see it. Tell us about hours and costs.
We are open. We now have new hours, actually. We're open Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. with last entry in at 4 p.m. just to make sure that everybody that comes does have at least an hour to experience the museum. We've had a lot of folks that came in and thought it was a 20-minute experience and arrived in Boomtown, USA and said, we've made a mistake.
Yeah, you're going to want to plan some time there.
Yes. And cost is $10 for adults. We do offer 10% military, veteran, and senior discount, and then children up to the age of 11 are 7, and 2 and under are no charge. We do offer special group rates. So if you want to bring a whole busload of folks through, we'd love to have you. We do offer guided tours for those folks as well. Just give us a call.
It is very popular among schools for field trips too, right?
Yes, it is. We book up pretty quick for April and May. Last year, we had approximately about 5,000 students come through the museum and learn all about their East Texas heritage and a little bit about the science piece as well.
Okay, let's talk about that science piece here, because that's one of the things that in doing the video for the East Texas Oil Museum that really fascinated me is and thinking about the time in which these developments were made and these discoveries were made, that the things that they were able to learn. So explain to me the best you can, because this is not a visual format. We do have, of course, video that will be on the YouTube channel, but for the most part, people are listening to this. The best you can, how in the world do these guys know? And we're talking in the 1920s here. How do they know where to even start to look for oil?
Well, a good indicator is what the surface of the land looks like. So, and what earlier fields in the area were. So there are lots of different types of formations, geological formations, where you can find oil. Here in Texas, a lot of them were salt dome formations, and they look very unique on the landscape. So, Luling was a salt dome formation. There were other ones throughout Texas that really clued in folks that if there was going to be oil here in East Texas, that's what it was going to look like. And that's what those major oil companies had looked for in the 1920s. And of course, surprise, we aren't that type. So I still don't know how they decided to start drilling here in East Texas, other than a hunch, and there was oil in other places.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why they call it wildcatting. They just kind of go out and give it their best guess.
Let's go poke a hole and see what happens. Yeah.
Yep. Make sure you have enough money to cover it all and keep going.
Prehistorically, I guess, this area, the area of Texas that we're in especially, would have been underwater at the bottom of the ocean. And I guess that's how the oil forms down through the prehistoric and the ancient history. And I guess the salt dome, I guess, would be remnants or something like that would be remnants of that salt water. But and then you said just wildcatting and finding it the rest. But salt water does come into play as you begin to drill. Talk to me about the role that plays and how it was dealt with, because it originally ended up drilling and getting oil, producing these wells, ended up having a pretty major environmental impact there at the beginning.
It did. So the type of formation that the East Texas oil field is called a pinch out trap. So I always tell the little kiddos, think about a crab claw and how a crab claw closes. Mm-hmm. So you have kind of the top layer of rock is flat, and then the bottom kind of curves off or angles off just like a crab claw.
Right. Okay.
And so that is where the water floats the oil into that pinch. So if you have your hand, think about the top of your hand as the top part of the rocks, and the slide part is your thumb where that lays. And then the oil goes into that top part where your fingers meet your thumb. And obviously, everybody knows oil and water don't get along, so the salt water floats it into the top of the trap, and that's where you drill, and that's how the oil comes out. Now, we're lucky enough to be a water drive field, and the salt water comes from an aquifer over Dallas's way, and that's the part of the pinch that's open, and it gets refilled. So as the oil was extracted, the water backfilled it, and more water came in. So initially, there wasn't a lot of salt water coming out. There are three things that come out of a well in the East Texas oil field. You have oil, salt water, and you have natural gas. So at first, the producers just let it flow out onto the ground, and it went into the rivers and the streams. And again, as third grade science will tell you, freshwater things don't like salt water. And so a lot of plant life were dying, a lot of animal life was dying, and so they knew they had a problem. Now, that problem also stemmed from the reservoir was losing pressure because we were pulling so much oil out that the aquifer wasn't filling it back as fast as they needed it to maintain that pressure. So in 1942, they developed the East Texas Saltwater Disposal Company, and they are still in operations today. And what they do is they collect that salt water, they pipe it back to the western side of the field, and they re-inject it into the field. So that water is getting recycled throughout. It's not going onto the land. It's not causing things to die. And it continues to maintain the pressure. Now, they feel that by doing that in 1942, they extended the life of the field by 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was a big success. And actually now I haven't heard of the latest numbers, but obviously we're still going 94 years.
Okay, so what I don't think, and as you're telling me all of this, I'm thinking, this diagram that we used, that we're probably going to put up on the video side of this thing, of a little pocket in that pinch out area, like you're talking about, of oil and the salt water and its little space there, and it's all nice and neat and drawn out and colored and all of that. Just how big are we talking about when we talk about the East Texas oil field? When we look at that diagram and we see the little area where the oil would have been, are we talking miles? Are we talking a football field? How big is this thing?
This thing was the world's largest oil field at the time of discovery. It is approximately 155,000 acres.
Wow.
45 miles north to south, between 5 and 12 miles wide, depending on where you are north to south. It is a big boy.
Whoa. Okay. So, and I guess, still producing after nearly 100 years, and still going, probably not as strong as it was, as you've already said. But And I know that now we see a lot of our friends and neighbors that are in the business, that are oil men or landmen or whatever they do in the oil field. They are heading out West Texas. A lot of folks are going out West Texas. What is it about West Texas that they're discovering or finding out that's made it so bustling now? Is there something different, a different kind of formation out there that is making it so attractive now? I mean, what's the deal out there?
I think they have increased the ability to go deeper is the big piece, but they definitely have a lot of oil. The Permian Basin originally came in 1926. Don't catch me lying. But the Santa Rita #1, I believe, was the very first well in the Permian Basin. And it just continues to be, more pockets are being found. But the one thing that you said is a lot of our neighbors, a lot of the people here in East Texas are still in oil. And one of the reasons that we are so strong in oil is because a lot of the businesses started here in the 1930s. This is where their headquarters are because of the East Texas oil field.
Do you know what this building was?
I'm guessing it's oil related.
It was Humble.
Yeah.
So one of their office buildings down along the way somewhere. It's not anymore. Obviously, there are still landmen that have offices in here, but not anything like what it used to be. But last week we talked to Henry Bell, and he was talking about this building and the beginnings of that. I don't think this was the first office, but it was an office building of theirs, one of theirs. But it's crazy to think about all the things that happened because of oil, and all the things that happened because of the oil in East Texas. And as a result of that, I want to talk to you a little bit now about, because I think it's fascinating how much you know about this subject. What's your background? How did you get into this?
I don't know how far you want to go into that, but basically, I owned a company where I sold antiques and collectibles, and I got to the point where I would see these amazing objects and artifacts and pieces of history go into private collections, never to be seen again. And it would hurt my heart a little bit because I was like, these are things that the general public, that the public needs to see, needs to know, needs to read, needs to have access to. And I saw the position for the East Texas Oil Museum pop up, and I said, you know what? This is where I don't ever have to let this history go.
Yeah.
I can share this with every person that comes through the door. Kilgore College was nice enough to offer me the position. I've been there for just over almost 6 years now.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to learn as much as I could about the East Texas oil field, really dive in. So I decided I was go back to school. I got my master's in history with an emphasis in public history, so I can really break down all of the history pieces and aspects for our visitors, and so that they can understand and they can gain the appreciation and they can really know what it was like. I do have the great background or backdrop of Boomtown, USA, where I'm not pointing at a picture. I'm saying, walk into this store and let me tell you about it.
Yeah.
So that helps with my job and making sure that those people that come and the visitors that are there really walk away with a greater appreciation of the crazy pivot point in East Texas history that is the East Texas oil field.
I bet being in the position you're in, not only are you able to share, obviously, history with a lot of people, but you're also getting a lot of folks who probably come to you with stories and things like that. You're probably hearing new things almost every day, huh?
Yeah, and that is one of the best things, is because we've been there since 1980, so we'll have a lot of families that come back, or they grew up there. There was a fella today, came in from Jacksonville, Florida. He said, I was born in Kilgore. I was like, welcome back. This is your heritage. You might live in Florida today, but this is you.
This is home.
And he was super excited to come back and to visit the museum again. And it's really one of those things that there are the people that come back, and there are the stories, and there are the additional the additional information that we get. And sometimes it's just a little nugget of info that sends me down a bunny trail to uncover something that wasn't necessarily known before. And Kilgore College has done a great, they've done a great job of allowing me to dig those things up. We added the women of the East Texas oil boom, where it's, now we have an 8-minute video that spotlights 6 remarkable women of the boom, and Daisy Bradford is definitely in there, as well as several others. And, to bring different aspects, to bring different backgrounds and demographics, and really involve all the people that lived in the 1930s. We still have more work to do, but I'm very thankful that it's not a place that is stagnant. Something is always changing. Another story is being discovered. Another aspect is being shared of the East Texas oil boom. And I'm happy to be a part of it.
That episode that we did with you, and we shot this nearly 2 years ago now, and I've been kind of waiting for the right time to air it, and it feels like now is the right time. So later on this season, that will air, and we. On Expedition Texas, our show is not about the museums necessarily, even though we do spend a significant portion of the show giving people a glimpse of the museum. We don't want to show you all of it because we want you to go there. You need to go there. But in this episode, you were able to connect us with the places that, which is what the show is about, is the places. And for example, that Daisy Bradford well is still pumping.
It is.
And we saw it. We took folks there. It's no secret. It's marked. You can find it.
Yeah.
You can see and you can see the old photos at the museum and compare that to that happened on that piece of land. That well is still pumping and producing oil to this day. Which is amazing to think about, and to think that you can go to that place and see, that is still happening there. And but there were some other places that you told us about. I want to touch on those a little bit. And these tie in, some of them loosely, but to that time, New London, and that story and our trip there, which is a part of that 2-part series that we're doing this season on Expedition Texas. New London grew as a result out of all of that, and then what happened there, the tragedy. Talk to me a little bit about New London and how it fits into the story here.
So New London was in the field. It's a little bit south of Kilgore. It's about 15 minutes, so I think it's like 12 miles, something like that. Don't come for me if I have my geography wrong. But it's pretty close. And just as the Daisy Bradford, which is very close, it's about 5 miles from New London, perhaps, on the road, not as the crow flies. So everybody that came, Humble had a camp there. There was some other camps from oil companies, and so there were people that came, families that came, and of course you need a place to educate your children, and the oil money was there, and they built a beautiful school in 1932. And as I said earlier, one of the byproducts, or at that point it was seen as a byproduct, was natural gas. Now natural gas doesn't have a scent naturally. There is a scent, and if you are aware of what it is, you will know what it is, but it doesn't alarm you. You get a headache, you feel nauseous, those type of things. That's kind of what happens when you are around natural gas and don't know it. So in this school building that they built, they had a basement, and they ran the lines from the well that was on the school property into the school, and that's what they used to heat it. Well, in March of 1937, it's the day that has, marked East Texas for a lot of reasons. There was an explosion at 3:20, and it was a day when approximately 300 people perished at the explosion because it was right at the end of the school day. Some of the buses had left at that point. Several of the grades weren't there because they were off in Henderson at I believe it was a UIL competition. And the 4th and 5th grade, if I'm remembering correctly, were most affected by the explosion. And immediately everybody showed up. They cleaned the rubble out very quickly. They found anybody that was injured. Mother Frances here in Tyler was scheduled to open the following day. They opened up early to handle the injured children and people. There were some officials coming from Austin for a meeting. There were a lot of children that their parents came, identified them, and took them, and they don't have a true number because of that. A lot of them were buried in a cemetery right there in New London. And as you go through that grave, there was all the same graveyard. As you go through, you'll see the same date on
so many of those,
many of the headstones. But the New London Museum, or the London Museum there in New London, is it's not only dedicated to that day, but it's also dedicated to the school and the history of the school. Now, it is a day that is the deadliest day in American school history.
Yeah.
One we hope will never be broken.
Yeah.
But there were positives that came from that day. One of them is the odorant in natural gas. Now, when there is a natural gas leak, you will know it because it smells like rotten eggs.
Yes, that sulfur smell, kind of rotten egg smell.
Yep. It is not a pleasant smell. You will identify it relatively quickly.
You know something is wrong if you smell that smell. And that came from that because nobody knew or detected what was going on. They don't really know what set off the explosion. It wouldn't matter. Any number of things could have caused it.
Yes.
And it's because of that pocket of gas that collected beneath the school that happened. So, while that is sad history, it was another sad but a very effective way to learn that there are ways to prevent tragedies like that from happening again. On a lighter note, a much lighter note, actually, you sent us to another museum, the Gaston Museum, which they actually. That is right near a school that was prominent during that time. A lot of schools and businesses and things associated with bringing people to this area were prominent at that time. That museum is actually closed at this point, though, right?
It is. It is currently closed, and I'm not 100% what their future holds. Mm-hmm. I believe that they have decided to go digital instead of physical.
Okay.
So I think they have some exciting things coming up. They haven't quite announced all that yet, but they're definitely keeping the Gaston community and Gaston school heritage alive.
Awesome. Well, we will do our best to tell the story of the East Texas Oil Museum through 2 episodes of Expedition Texas coming up this season. And Olivia, it is so cool to have you here telling us on this, only the second episode of the new Expedition Texas podcast now, as we kind of dive into this world a little bit and give people these, we took, nearly an hour here almost, and to be able to tell these stories a little more in depth, we don't have that kind of time on TV. Even when we do 2 episodes, we don't have that kind of time on TV. So it's nice to just sit and talk with you and hear these stories. And again, will you remind folks how to get information on the East Texas Oil Museum at Kilgore College?
The easiest way to do it is just visit kilgore.edu/oil museum.
All right, cool. Make sure to plan your trip out there. You will be blown away when you walk into Boomtown, East Texas. Is it Boomtown, USA? All right, okay. Boomtown, USA. And I always refer to it as the life-size diorama because it's like you walking in to the old downtown street, and it's such a cool thing. Be sure to bring the kids too, because help them learn about what made East Texas, and that is that East Texas oil field. I love it. Anything that I haven't mentioned that we need to make sure we tell folks about before we get wrapped up here, Olivia? Don't want to jump the gun. We good? Got the thumbs up? Okay.
Double thumbs up.
Okay, double thumbs up, folks. We're good to go. All right, cool. Well, there you go. That is it. Our second podcast here, Expedition Texas, the podcast. We are here every week. We're digging in deeper on some lost history in Texas, and be sure to watch Expedition Texas. Check your local listings for showtimes on TV. And if you get a chance, I would love it if you would check out the book. It is Expedition Texas, Tales from the Road. These are behind-the-scenes stories and the stories of some of the greatest places we've been across Texas. You'll see on the cover of the book the old Bankhead Highway. At the top of the cover, you'll see the old the sunken ship, the SS Selma, and the stories of how we got to some of these places and how we found out about these places and how we went there and some of the people we met along the way. Folks like Olivia down through the years who have told us all this great history and shared it, and that's what we look forward to doing each and every week. New season is on right now. Check your local listings for showtimes to watch a TV show, and of course come right back here next week for another episode of Expedition Texas, the podcast. For Olivia Moore, I'm Bob Malden, and we'll talk to you next time.